Thank you so much for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar titled Preventing Burnout and #Resignation, Investing in Teacher Coaching and Support. Today's discussion again continues our series following on to our session from late last year when we took some time to quote unquote follow the money and understand how states and districts are investing the $190 billion that was included in the federal recovery dollars known as the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. Each month this year, we will engage in deep explorations of what we are calling smart investments, or strategies that we see as worthy big bets that have the potential to make a real impact on equitable learning recovery if invested and implemented now and sustained even beyond the current influx of federal support. Today, we will explore state and district investments in teacher coaching and support. Given that teacher retention is anticipated to become one of the biggest challenges in K-12 education in 2023, and more teachers are joining the ranks of individuals who see #resignation as the only option, they have expressed frustration with the lack of support in what they're calling one and done professional development. What's needed now are professional growth opportunities throughout a teacher's career, along with mentoring and coaching that support mental health, collegial connection, and the development of new classroom techniques. And as states and districts continue to invest ESSER funds to accelerate equitable learning loss recovery, teacher support is rising to the top as a key strategy to retain the good teachers that students really need. Innovative models for coaching and mentoring have emerged, and solution providers are partnering with districts to engage teachers in comprehensive cohorts where they have the opportunity to learn from one another and from expert, experienced teachers. And today we have the opportunity to explore these models and hear how districts are investing to ensure that teachers have the support they need to keep them teaching in innovative ways that accelerate learning. The esteemed Dr. Carrie Wright, former State Superintendent of Education in Mississippi, who has extensive experience with teacher support, will moderate a panel of leaders from teacher and coaching and mentoring providers, including the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, Opportunity Culture with Public Impact, the new Teacher Center and Teaching Lab. Dr. Wright will also engage in discussion with leaders from the Alabama State Department of Education and Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools, who will share what state and district investments in teacher support look like on the ground. And to begin our conversation, I'm honored to welcome and briefly introduce our esteemed moderator and panelists with us today. And please note that the full bios are linked in the chat. So scroll up to the top of the chat, they're in there. So I am just previewing who we have with us today. So our moderator is Dr. Carrie M. Wright, who became the State Superintendent of Education for Mississippi in 2013 and left the office in June 2022. Under her leadership, Mississippi initiated education reforms that have increased literacy skills in pre-K through third grade, pushed student achievement, and it increased the graduation rate to an all-time high of 87.7%, which is amazing. Our presenters today include Peggy Brookins, who is the President and CEO of the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, and whose long career as an educator includes many national leadership positions and accolades. One example, in July 2014, President Barack Obama named Brookins as a member of the President's Advisory Commission on Educational Excellence for African Americans. Brian C. Hassel is co-president of Public Impact, where he consults nationally with leading public agencies, nonprofit organizations, and foundations working for dramatic improvements in K-12 education. He co-leads the Opportunity Culture Initiative and is a recognized expert on teacher and principal effectiveness, school turnarounds, school funding systems, and charter school excellence. Atini Howard is Chief Program Officer at the new Teacher Center and has over 20 years of experience in education as a teacher, principal, chief academic officer, and nonprofit executive. She's committed to creating exceptional learning spaces where all stakeholders can meet their full potential. And lastly, our final presenter, Sarah Johnson, is the CEO of Teaching Lab, a national nonprofit organization with a mission to fundamentally shift the paradigm of teacher professional learning for educational equity. Sarah previously held leadership positions with the Overdeck Family Foundation and the New York City Department of Education, and was a high school science teacher. And finally, our commentators include Bishay Ferris, who is manager of the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Schools Teacher Leader Pathway, one of the largest and oldest advanced teaching roles programs in the country. A former teacher and instructional leader, Bishay transitioned to supporting the program in 2018, serving first as a coordinator and then as a specialist before becoming the manager. Lastly, Bonnie Short is the director of the Alabama Reading Initiative. Her previous work as a primary grade teacher, reading coach, school principal, and regional literacy leadership specialist greatly guides her state work. So welcome to all of you. I cannot wait to learn from you and engage with you. And I'm now very excited to turn it over to the esteemed Dr. Carrie Wright to get our conversation going.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us. We've got a great topic that we're going to be talking about today. Building teacher capacity is huge, and we want to build their capacity to provide sound instruction for children because we know that's exactly what happens when we want student achievement to improve. I can also tell you it's a very smart investment. Always supporting teachers is a smart thing to do. And also you just need to know it was one of Mississippi's most successful strategies in terms of our own improvement. So Peggy, I would like to start with you. If you don't mind. I want you to share your perspective, obviously, and also around teacher mentoring and support. And then I want you to talk about how the use of ESSER funds has been utilized to further that. And while you're talking about that, I want, since you're at the national level, what kind of national trends have you seen around teacher coaching, teacher mentoring, teacher support, and high quality professional development?
All right, that's a mouthful, so keep me focused. Thanks for being here. I am honored to be here and be on this panel. And I'll just start with Dr. Wright, I think the obvious, and I'll say teacher retention. And I'll point to the study in 2018 and 2020, the Center for Educator Recruitment and Advancement released a report. And it was comparing turnover rates of all South Carolina teachers to those of only National Board Certified teachers in the state. And both concluded that over a 5-year period, turnover rates in South Carolina for MBCTs were significantly lower than all of those teachers, the other teachers in the state. If you look at this trend, it is 4 times higher for teachers who are not board certified. And if you think about just the economics of that and what going through board certification does as far as the support systems, how you're mentored through this process, and what you learn and the transformational nature of board certification, just what it would mean to the budgets of school districts to retain teachers over that period of time. And I think about, what we have seen around the country when we think about states and federal COVID relief funds. We've been working with GEAR funding, that's the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, the Mississippi Time Project, and you know our work well in the state of Mississippi. And this is a project that fully funds and supports professional development and national board certification journey for 300 teachers, primarily in the Delta. They were provided with Apple devices and training through Apple's Professional Learning Center, and they get these badges when they complete their training. But everything they do, all their practices aligned to national board standards. They are supported completely through this process. They've incorporated technology into their reflections and their analysis of their practice for board certification. So that's the way the governor used some of his GEAR funding. The ESSER funding, the Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund, we partnered with the state of Kentucky. And this is an early entry project. It's a pilot for 100 early career teachers to participate in a fully supported 2-year program to support and achieve their pursuit of national board certification. They'll receive full fee support for the cost of certification, their professional learning to support their national board journey. They will receive a mentor, coaching, and training as well. And then, at the district level in Columbus Municipal School District, they're using ESSER funds as well to pay for components and candidate support through Mississippi State's world-class teaching program. And then federal funding, we think about federal title funding, Every Student Succeeds Act, the ESSA, Title II, Part A, In Texas, the National Board Candidacy Cohort Program was awarded funding for 17 districts to establish National Board cohorts. The grant will pay for candidates' components and the district to establish, candidate support programs or partner with external stakeholders to provide candidate support. But all of it is focused highly on that support system that they receive, the mentoring that they receive in their journey through board certification. And then, there are some things that we at the National Board are quite proud of. And that is the work that we're doing with networks to mobilize those networks of mentors, MBCTs, using with our unions, superintendents, parents, private businesses, and other champions to help execute meaningful initiatives such as the Time Project that we're working on in Mississippi. Also, recently the National Board was awarded $14.2 million from the U.S. Department of Education for a seed grant that's supporting effective educator development. This will fund the National Board's project called From the Margins to the Center, supporting teacher diversity, equality, and retention. So the project has a specific focus on engaging and supporting educators of color while they're advancing the National Board's priority to make board certification accessible to all educators. And at the heart of that project is a sustained and intense approach to teacher support that is culturally responsive, that is meaningful, it's standards-based, it's data-driven, it's classroom focused. And so over the 3 years of the grant, we will partner with 10 communities for that. And then finally, I just want to say the learning community of reflective educators, we call it a learning core. It's a volunteer mentor program connecting MBCTs and National Board candidates to provide moral support and logistical support for their candidate journey. It's aligned to the DEI goals and commitment to help retain teachers of color and give priority to BIPOC educators for the learning core. And everybody who is pursuing National Board certification, one of the big wins as far as salary incentive and program building is in California. Went to 2,000 teachers in high need schools in order to assure that those teachers have access to board certification. So I'll stop there, but there's a lot more that I could say as well.
Well, it's very impressive, Peggy, and what your work that you're doing is incredibly impressive. If there are folks that are listening to this who are interested in obtaining additional information or maybe wanting to be a part of your grant, should they reach out to you personally, or is there someone in your organization that you could let them know to reach out to?
They can reach out to me and I will direct them to the correct person.
Perfect. I think you're going to get a lot of requests there from everything you've just described. That's very exciting. Thanks, Peggy. I appreciate it. So I want to welcome now Brian and Atieni and Sarah to join the conversation, if you would, please. And what I want you to do is explain your model. Each of you have a very different model of teacher coaching and support. And then I want you to talk a little bit about how you are partnering with school districts. So Brian, let's start with you. Talk to us about the opportunity culture and how you're working with districts and what your model looks like on the ground.
Great. Well, thanks for putting on this webinar, CGLR, and thanks, Dr. Wright, the esteemed Dr. Wright. Appreciate it. Hopefully you'll get a chance to share some of what you did in Mississippi, which is so impressive. Let me talk a little bit about the opportunity culture model. It's a school design that's set up to support teachers every day with a permanent change in the staffing structure of the school to give teachers coaching and guidance embedded in their school day every day. And the basis of it is forming teachers into teams led by a multi-classroom leader. Multi-classroom leader is an excellent teacher with a great track record who takes the leadership of a small team, 3 to 8 other teachers, perhaps a grade level, perhaps a subject department in a secondary school, and becomes fully the leader of that team. So they co-teach with the other teachers on the team. They model instruction. They observe and give feedback in their classrooms. And they do a lot outside the classroom too with their team to plan and prepare for instruction, to look at data about students together and make adjustments in their plans over time. So it's an embedded coaching role. It's highly paid, about 20% above their salary schedule on average across the country. And there are about 500 schools now implementing this model around the country in about 50 school districts. It's a model that is designed to work within school budgets. So we can talk a little bit later about financial sustainability, but districts and schools figure out how to reallocate the dollars to make this model possible. And the main idea of it is to provide much more support for teachers every day, and then also provide support for students every day. And via that, also give a career path for great teachers to stay in the classroom while advancing in their career and earning more.
Well, Brian, definitely let's circle back to you, because I would like to talk. I'm sure a lot of people are asking, how do you pay for it? That's always a big question. So let's definitely circle back to you and talk about how districts are managing that. Atiani, let's go to you. Let's talk about your program and with the new Teacher Center. Talk to me about its approach and the impact that you've seen thus far.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Wright. Welcome, everybody. Happy to be here with you today. NTC's work is really about coupling ongoing professional learning with strong mentoring and coaching. And we really believe over the 20 years of our organization's journey that those two pieces are key levers to producing positive experiences and outcomes for all students, and also retaining teachers in the profession, which is part of what we're here to talk about today. And our model is research-based. It provides teachers with a framework to orient to the craft, research-based tools, and mentoring and coaching supports to help them implement in context and really blend the science of learning and development, content knowledge, and a deep understanding of student needs, talents, and challenges to improve their experiences and outcomes. NTC has enjoyed a long relationship with various federal grant study programs. And in that way, we've been able to validate our work. So as a result of participation in an independent I3 validation grant, our work was found to produce, after 2 years of coaching support, 2 to 4 months of additional learning in reading and 2 to 5 months of additional learning in math, compared to students of the control group teachers who did not receive NTC's coaching support. And we really anchor our work in a few key components. So deep knowledge of self, helping educators understand who they are as human beings and how the various lenses that they bring to their work influence practice. Knowledge of students, understanding what students do and do not know, what they've mastered, what their interests are, and how to really spark and ignite the joy of learning that lives in children. And marrying all of that with really deep and proficient knowledge of content and pedagogy to really ensure that all students have meaningful access to grade level content and content that really helps them move towards college and career readiness. And in addition to the studies that NTC has participated in to validate the impact of our approach, several years back, we also wrote a paper called Counting the Cost, which studied the impact over a 5-year period of investing in coaching and mentoring as a key lever for improvement. And the study found that several of the districts who participated were able to save $1 million that they were able to then use to reinvest in other priorities. And this was due in large part to increased teacher retention, which occurred as a result of the coaching supports that they were receiving from NTC. I'll pause there. That was a lot.
Yeah, that is a lot. But Atiana, I'm very impressed with the idea that you're also, the two things that really jumped out at me, the focus on individual student needs, because I think that's a critical piece. Sometimes we need to spend a little bit more time on is like, what individually do they need? And also ensuring that our teachers have the content knowledge that they need. I think that varies as well. And so how's your organization like digging into that? Like what does that look like?
Well, as a coaching organization, we have a really deep commitment to aligning our internal culture to components of coaching. And so our staff has the benefit of engaging in a really deep internal learning strategy that allows them to continue to hone both content knowledge, but also pedagogical knowledge to really make sure that that marriage between who students are and what the content is and the best pathways to actually helping them access that content are all interwoven in the approach. And essentially, I think when NTC went through a mission change about 5 years ago to really center marginalized student populations in how we support educators. And we talk about that shift as really moving from being centered in what teachers need to being centered in what students need and how we can really help teachers become super proficient at unearthing those needs and really orienting to how instructional design takes place by centering students and then marrying and understanding the technique and the design processes that are essential to be able to marry the lesson design and delivery accordingly.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much. So Sarah, last but not least, you represent the teaching lab, and we obviously want to know about your model and working with districts, but I know you've also got some research that you wanted to share with us as well. So Sarah?
That's correct. Yeah, and so we can pull up the research slide as well. And also, I think that Emily can drop the study in the chat. So there's a lot of hype around the impact of tutoring right now. But the truth is there is also a very large evidence base behind the impact and power of direct to teacher coaching. So this is a study done by Matt Kraft and David Blazer, and they actually analyzed 60 studies on direct-to-teacher coaching. And direct-to-teacher coaching is very different than traditional PD because direct-to-teacher coaching is individualized, it's time-intensive, it's sustained over the course of a semester or a year, it's context-specific, and it's focused on discrete skills. And what we say at Teaching Lab is if we actually really care about students and advancing educational equity, we're going to care about teachers because teachers are the #1 factor that impacts student achievement. And right now, when teacher morale is at the lowest it's been in 50 years, teachers need individualized attention. What we say as well is that teacher coaching can be like SEL for teachers. When we do our best work, we get feedback from teachers like, this is the first time I felt supported all year. Mm-hmm. And I think that's also a consequence of the pandemic and other staffing shortages. When you have teacher shortages and then you have coaches and whatnot being redeployed to become teachers, there is nobody left to support the teachers. And we see this happening across the nation in New York, Chicago, Mississippi, Arkansas. There are a dearth of people that can provide that individualized support to educators. And so what you can see here are the evidence-based practices that we embed in our coaching approach. So similar to what Atiene shared, we embed the coaching model within a larger professional learning model and professional learning system. Sometimes, workshop models and PD, they get a bad rap, but if they're done well and aligned with a coaching approach, you can get a really high impact on teacher practice as well as student learning. Additionally, our coaching approach employs an observation and feedback cycle. We're all about cycles at Teaching Lab because the other thing that's really common is teachers don't get any follow-up. Someone will teach them something and then nobody follows up with them to see if it's actually happening in the classroom. Nobody supports the teachers to analyze data to see if a change has actually led to an improvement. So this cycle is really essential. Additionally, our coaching model is focused on sustaining this professional dialogue with teachers. And I do think in a more global way that coaching is a way to professionalize teaching. And then finally, similar as well to what Atini said, all of our coaches build the content knowledge of teachers prior to engaging in the observation and feedback cycle. And this is done in two ways: one, through professional development, and two, through individualized sort of development plans for the teachers. So for instance, in New York City, we do a lot of K-2 literacy coaching. And our coaches will do things like teach the teachers how to pronounce the phonemes in the English language in the right way, because that's essential for students who need to build their phonemic awareness. And finally, our coaching approach has shown pretty exceptional and even surprising impacts on teacher practice and student learning. So for instance, it's very rare for an intervention administered over a year to generate big effect sizes in terms of shifting teacher practice and student learning, but our coaching model has been shown to improve student learning even over just the course of 1 year. And this is a huge accomplishment because it actually takes a major shift in teacher practice to actually impact student learning. And I think as we recover from the pandemic, it's really important to invest in the interventions that dramatically shift teacher practice, because otherwise we're going to have a lost generation of students who are not reading on grade level and who are not accessing grade level math and who are not prepared for college careers and to pursue their dreams.
Thanks, Sarah. It brings to mind, when we were making investments, and certainly the ESSER money has been out there for that, I'd kind of be curious to know from all three of you, any three of you, what results are you seeing so far? You've mentioned a few examples, but what results are you seeing, and how are you seeing this in terms of teacher development and the investments that are being made in teachers in a coaching way? And the other thing that I have for each of you is, and Brian brought this up a little bit earlier, what are districts doing or schools doing to prepare for this ongoing teacher development, ongoing teacher coaching when the ESSER monies no longer exists? So I'll let any one of you start that and we can take turns.
I can jump in on that, Dr. Wright. So as far as impact, we've heard some great results from these other coaching models. And in the case of opportunity culture, a couple of third-party evaluations have been done. And what they show is that when a teacher joins a team led by a multi-classroom leader, their students' learning grows by an extra half year per year on average. And that's like 1.5 years of learning instead of a year on average. And that's across math and reading. So we see that strong result again within that 1 year of getting that intensive coaching. We chalk it up to that intensiveness, that they're able to get that great support and guidance from the multi-classroom leader. And the way districts and schools are investing in this particular model is by helping their schools go through a change process to set it up. This is a different way of organizing schools. It's not something you can just buy. You've got to reorganize your teams, and teachers get excited about that and become part of the design teams that figure out, how is our schedule going to work? How is our staffing teaming structure going to work in this particular school for our context? But it is a fair bit of work to get from point A to point B. But then once you have it in place, then it's a sustainable structure that you can carry forward over time. And I think that's what we really ought to be thinking about here in this moment. We have this unprecedented federal investment. It's going to end. At the end of the day, are teachers still going to be able to get the coaching and support and the guidance that they need into the future? Our future teachers who haven't yet joined, and there are lots of them coming, as we know, with all the vacancies and turnover, are they going to be able to get the guidance and support they need? And so the idea with opportunity culture is to put a structure in place that you can sustain. And the way schools and districts sustain it really from the start is a couple of main ways. One, instead of filling every single vacancy that a school has, keep some of the funding from those vacancies and use that to support the multi-classroom leader supplement, extra pay for all the teachers on the team potentially, and some paraprofessional or teacher resident support to make these teams function well. So not trade every vacancy, use some of the proceeds to pay these costs. Schools also, number two, find that there are some positions that they don't need when they have this structure in place. And so perhaps there's an instructional coach that could become a multi-classroom leader. There's no need for a school-wide instructional coach once you have the entire school covered with multi-classroom leaders. So that's a way these models can be sustained over time. And so the key is use temporary funds to invest in a change to get there. And then once you're there, you can sustain it over time into the future.
Talk to me a little bit about building level principal buy-in, because I think that and how you go about convincing your building level principals that this is a really good idea.
So it's such a great question, because we all know that makes a huge difference for any implementation. Most principals, if you really ask them, they'll tell you they have a pretty unmanageable job. They have 20, 30, 40, maybe 50 people that report to them directly that they have to evaluate and support. If they're in a secondary school, that's all the content areas. They have to somehow be the instructional leader across the entire spectrum. And so what we say to principals is, what if you could have a job that's more like most professional managers, where you have teams, each team has a leader, and your job is to lead that team of leaders. So there's 5, 6, 7, 4 team leaders in your school. Each of them has their responsibility. You can support those 4, 5, 6 leaders every day in being as effective as they can be. You can do the walkthroughs in their classrooms. You can sit in their meetings with their team members and give them feedback, just like they're doing with their teachers. But it's not 20, 30, 40 people that you're supporting. It's 4, 5, 6, 7, like a normal span of managers within the professional sector. And most principals see that as, hey, this enhances my ability to be the true leader of this school versus my unmanageable job before.
Thanks, Brian. Sarah or Tierney?
Thanks, Sarah. I think, Brian, you made such a good point around using the influx of money to implement new things that you can ultimately sustain over time. And that reminds me of a partner of ours, Clint ISD in Texas, where we have been working with them to really create an aligned professional culture where the professional learning and the coaching speak to each other. And they were able to apply to the state, to the TEA, to get some innovation funding that allowed them to get that work off the ground and free up other funds so that they could figure out how to sustain the work over time. And we've been with them since 2016. So it definitely is sustainable work. I think the other piece that we haven't focused on as much in this conversation that I'd like to lift up is what Sarah spoke about, lost generations of children, and how we are going to really need to build teacher capacity to understand the content that came in the grade level before, that's coming in the grade level after, so that they can really be targeted and go deep in the places where student learning needs to be shored up because of the disruption introduced by the pandemic. And there really is no way, we've all been classroom teachers, building leaders, there's no sustainable way to do that kind of deep year-over-year work that is really going to take to dig out of the impacts of what we've all experienced, other than really coherent and sustained coaching. So when we think about the cost, there is the financial cost, there's the cost of retention, and there's also the cost of really making sure that educators are effectively and manageably equipped to respond to this really, once in our lifetime, unprecedented challenge that they're facing.
That's a really
I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. That's just going to ditto that about making sure that teachers and how we go about that. I think the three of you ought to get together and craft some kind of little manual about this, because there are these processes that can be put in place that are really relatively simple, but some of these are a little bit more in depth when you're talking about making sure that a teacher knows the skills needed in the prior grade and then the grade coming after. That's huge for teachers to know in order to be able to pick that up and then move on that. Sarah, what was your thinking on this?
Yeah, very similar to a teeny. So what we say is that, teaching reading is rocket science. Teaching is difficult. It's amazing. It's fulfilling, but it's difficult. And the coaches that you need in order to support teachers need to have these really amazing skill sets as well. They need to know, for instance, if it's in K-2 literacy, they need to know the science of reading. And then they also have to know how to work with adults to change their mindsets and their practices, which is no small task. And coaching can be expensive, especially if it's high dosage coaching. But the good news is that it's not as expensive as some other interventions like tutoring. And I brought up tutoring on purpose because I think a lot of districts and school systems are investing in tutoring, which can sometimes cost $3,000 per student. But if you give a teacher an individual coach, the cost is way less than that. And the leverage is much higher, meaning that if you're coaching an elementary school teacher, that investment is going to impact 30 students. And if you're coaching a middle school or high school teacher, that investment could impact 90 or 150 students. That's how many students I taught when I was a high school science teacher. And so I think we have to think about the ROI in those types of terms. So like, do we want to spend $3,000 per student, or do we want to spend, $3,000 per teacher and impact a very large group of students? Finally, in the same article that I shared, a really interesting finding is that virtual coaching models are as effective as in-person coaching models. So what we're doing at Teaching Lab is we're experimenting with many different approaches to coaching. And so we have an extremely high dosage model that we're testing out in New York City. We have a slightly less dosage model in Chicago. And then in Arkansas, we have a blended model. And that's very interesting because in the Arkansas model, we are on site once a week. And then the teachers get virtual coaching the 3 other weeks in the month. And we're going to compare these 3 different programs and see what type of impact that we get. And I think this kind of research that we can do during this ESSER era can also inform the sort of post-ESSER era and inform districts around how they should spend their, smaller amount of funds.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. Peggy brought this up in her conversation. I do think, with the ESSER money ending, folks are really going to have to take a hard look at the title dollars that are coming in, because there is money still going to be coming in for Title II. There is still money coming in for Title I, et cetera. So I think that as districts are looking at ways to use this money, special education is still going to get its money. So there's ways that you can really sit back and think as a team about how best to invest in this so that we continue to support our teachers. Thanks, Sarah. I appreciate that. We're going to turn to our commentators now to get a district and state perspective. So Bonnie, we're going to start with you and the state of Alabama. And so what it was near and dear to me not that long ago. And also we want to talk about how's Alabama supporting its teachers? And I really want you to speak, if you can, specifically to the literacy work that I know that you are leading. So Bonnie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, and we were very fortunate that before COVID hit, we had been investigating at Carrie's home state in Mississippi to find out how they were amplifying coaching in Mississippi. And so we were putting together the Alabama Literacy Act, which was born in the winter of 2019. So when COVID hit, we were just about to deploy coaching throughout our state. Our legislature put their money in. They allocated a local reading specialist to every school with a kindergarten, first, second, or third grade. And they also put in money for regional specialists. So it's a multi-level coaching model. Our regional specialists, we have some that support the local reading specialists primarily, and some that support principals and central office, because leadership was such a pivotal part of making sure that schools were moving in the right direction. We needed the leaders to have the understanding of what was going on in literacy, and also the understanding of that coach and principal relationship and how they can work in tandem to support teachers. It really resonated to me when I was listening to Peggy talk, because she was talking about national board, and I was thinking about when I went through my national certification and how reflective of a process it is, how it continued to make me go back and think about what took place. And in education, we don't always take the time to do that. But when you have a coach, you have a built-in person to help you reflect. That person is coming in and asking you questions that they may already know the answer to, or asking you questions to make you think deeper about what it is that you have been implementing in the classroom or working with a teacher about. It takes me back to the Joyce and Showers research, where it indicates where if you are just presenting, if you are just having them do, you're not going to get the outcome. You're going to get 0 to 5% of consistent behaviors from those. But if you have coaching and administrative support built in, you're looking at a 95% outcome. And so it goes back to what Brian said about that investment and making sure we're really looking at what are we doing, what are we putting our money into, and where are we going to get the biggest bang for our buck. When you think about moving from a house to a house, it may seem like a great idea to get all your friends and neighbors to put their things in their cars and vehicles, but are you going to have a better outcome if you rent a large U-Haul to put all those things in? You're going to have less trips that you do, or maybe even go further and invest somebody to move you. I'm not going to move myself ever again. I'm going to invest and make it worth my while and reduce things breaking or reduce those. So really look at your investment to find out how you can get your bang for your buck. When we talk about coaching in Alabama, we, you may or may not know, we're pretty headstrong with our Alabama-Auburn football. And Nick Saban, when you think about the Alabama football coach, he's not just, once he reaches the national championship, they don't take away his coaches. He continues to maintain his coaches ongoing. And coaching is not for the weak. Coaching is for everyone. And so one of the main issues with coaching is to make sure that the people in the building realize that coaching is, that they're not going to have a coach because they're weak. They're going to get a coach to make them better. And everybody's got room to be better. Right when I started this role, the Braves won their World Series. And when I went back to look, the Braves have a 40-man roster and they have 14 coaches. If you're a World Series championship, look at that ratio. Mm-hmm. And so investing in people who will also invest in people is really going to take us where we want to be for our students. I love what Sarah was saying about, you know, that growth and impacting 30 students instead of one student at a time. And if you think about it, if you're investing in a teacher, not only are you investing in who that teacher is investing in that year, but for years to come, that information sticks, because coaching is about empowering the teacher and growing the teacher. And so over time, it's going to compound. So it really excites me to think of Alabama and where we are with coaching right now. We have invested in a student-centered coaching model with Diane Sweeney. We have coaching for our coaches, to make sure that we're guiding them in the right way on how to ask questions. We have, as a state, created an Alabama coaching framework so that when our math coaches are talking, they're speaking the same language as our reading coaches. And when Department of Early Childhood Education deploys their pre-K coaches, they have that framework too, so that we're all working toward the same goals. Also looking at coaches from the standpoint of who needs the most support. So who am I going to invest in as well to make sure that the schools that I have that are in the lowest 5%, we're giving them a more concentrated coaching model. They have more time with us so that we can build them up. And we're really seeing great things with that, which is evident in our NAEP data. While the nation's scores were declining, our scores increased. Tennessee and us were right at the top with the increase in scores. And I wholeheartedly believe coaching was a large part of that. I also, think about coaching with regard to technical support. We've got to be real careful that our coaching is not just telling somebody something, but truly guiding them to own it themselves. And that we're not technical support. There is a place and a time for that, but coaching is not that. In our Literacy Act, coaching is defined. Every element of what you can and cannot do in coaching is laid out in our Literacy Act. Coaches cannot be administrators. Coaches cannot be substitute teachers. Coaches are to be seen as peers and to work alongside. And the growth comes when you're living in the side-by-side, not in the modeling, but in the side-by-side piece where we can grow together.
Good points, Bonnie, really good points. And I think that, this is such a pivotal time for our nation when you're looking at the number of children who've really lost so much instructional time. So if we could build the capacity of our teachers to really hone in on individual children and their needs while building their skill sets, this is, I think, would go a long way toward equitable outcomes for all of our children. So thank you, Bonnie. Bishay, want to turn this same question to you. First, what's your reaction to the first part of the conversation? And I know that Charlotte Mecklenburg has a very impactful, very effective opportunity culture model at work. So if you could tell us about this and why the district is choosing to invest so specifically in coaching. So Bishay?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. So Charlotte Mecklenburg Schools implements the Teacher Leader Pathway, which is really an opportunity culture-based advanced teaching role program. And what we do is we make sure that we are hitting a few key points. We want to make sure that we're having the best employee retention that we can have, the best employee recruitment we can have. We're addressing those student achievement gaps that are hitting the country at all different angles. And we're also redesigning the way we look at education. So in the next slide, we can see that we've got 5 different positions that we actually have for advanced role teachers. And this is really where we hit the recruitment and retention component. So we know that pay can be a challenge in teachers in education in general. So these are game-changing differentials. These are seriously big differentials. When we look at some of the multi-classroom leader positions, you'll see a range up there. That's not actually a range. So the low end is in a non-Title I school, and the high end is in Title I schools, which tend to have the highest levels of teacher turnover. And they also tend to have greater student achievement gaps than some of the non-Title I schools. So like Brian said, we like to get our amazing teachers and our teachers that have a proven track record of high student achievement in front of more teachers or more students based on the different positions. And in the next slide, we could see 5 different positions and kind of a breakdown as to what they do. Our first 2 positions, the EIT1 and EIT2, those are expanded impact teachers. They are classroom-based positions. So we want teachers who are classroom-based to know that they have an option. There's an alternate career path here for them where they can stay instructional in the classroom and also earn more money. They will typically lead PLC meetings, professional learning community meetings. They'll help with content creation, and they can have larger class sizes. The EIT3 is a split model. It is half coaching, and it is half in the classroom as a teacher of record, followed by our multi-classroom leaders 1 and 2. They have more release time. Many of them are full release and have coaching caseloads. And we find that's particularly helpful. Like many of the other presenters have said, supporting other teachers to make sure that they are staying in the field. They have the resources and the assistance that they need to close those student achievement gaps. Addressing the funding for this, because you saw those differentials, those are significant differentials. In the next slide, you can actually see what we pay for with ESSER funds and what we don't. So ESSER funds were used to create the district support, district staff salaries, our professional development, which is focused not as much on content as it is on coaching sustainability and making sure these teacher leaders are extremely impactful. So we'll focus on communication. We will look at ways to be more organized. We'll talk about coaching frameworks, data-driven instruction. That's where the PD focus is. And then networking and informal opportunities, because it's important that teacher leaders are a cohort. They work together, that they communicate, and they can address problems as they arise, and they can also share best tips and tricks to be more effective. And this is where the sustainability comes in. These funds, the ESSER funds and any North Carolina Department of Public Instruction grants, do not fund any of the differentials or those positions. It is not part of that, and that's to address that funding cliff that so many people are concerned with. This program is sustainable with minimal investment from districts. So the positions are created, like Brian had said earlier, from regularly allotted funding for teacher positions, Title I funds, or restart funding flexibility. And Dr. Bevins brought up a good point too about MCLs being seen as managers. While they are instructional managers, a great thing to look at is we stress that they are non-evaluative. So, and that's a big piece of being a manager, is that evaluation component. MCLs, it is out in the open that they are there to support and make sure that their supported teachers are successful and they are not being evaluated by them. And we could see the impact of that when we skip ahead to slide 15, the impact on student improvement outcomes. As you see, year one through 3 teachers that are supported by a multi-classroom leader moved from the 49th to 69th percentile in CMS after 3 years of support. Over the same period, you had those that were not supported by a multi-classroom leader actually showing declines. And that's important. We have to close up these learning gaps, and having that one instructional leader on that team made an effect in multiple classrooms and hit multiple students. On the next slide, we can actually talk about teacher evaluation ratings as well. So standard 4 on the North Carolina teacher evaluation rubric is teachers facilitating learning for their students. By year 3, we have those supported by a multi-classroom leader at 1.5 times more likely to have an accomplished or distinguished rating than those that were not supported by a multi-classroom leader. And that's extremely important to retention. When you are good at your job, when you are having effects at your job, you are more likely to stay. You are more likely to be invested in your career. So aside from the impacts on student achievement, we also have impacts on teacher retention there.
Oh, you kind of reading my mind. I was going to ask both you and Bonnie about what are you seeing around teacher morale and teacher retention, and also you've given evidence here about student learning, and so very curious about morale, retention, and student learning as you've just described. So Bonnie, we'll start with you.
I definitely think the morale is a big part. When you're learning alongside with someone, you know, it's more fun. That in itself, it is more enjoyable to be with somebody in the learning instead of learning solo. But having that person that you can lean on for the difficult questions. Someone in the chat made mention about needing a life coach, so to speak. And I think when you have coaches, you automatically get that nature of building relationships with people. And in essence, you do have that life coach. It's that friend that you end up having conversations with about what didn't go well yesterday. But then you got to flex back into the work. You can't stay too long in the non-coaching work, but flex into the work and carry on. And again, like you said earlier, Bashay, like when you're feeling successful, you're more likely to want to stay. And so if we can equip people to have the things that they need, the tools to be successful, to see themselves as successful, we're going to have better outcomes for children, and we're going to have better outcomes in retention. We had a unique situation in Alabama where our superintendent made kind of a bold move last year and increased salaries. That kept us with more teachers than had originally planned. We had people who came off the retirement list. That's a temporary thing. How do we keep them ongoing? Because they were ready to walk out the door. And so how do we keep those individuals to sustain wanting to maintain the work that they do? How do we keep from having to use non-certified teachers, instructing students? We're all dealing with the shortages in our schools. And so I think coaching is a large part of the answer, because if we continue to do nothing, we're going to continue to lose people.
I agree. You've all brought up such amazing points about the ability to continue to support teachers and invest in them and build their capacity. I've often said that I don't think there's a teacher that walks through the door thinking, how am I going to screw this up today? I think everybody comes through that door saying, I want to be the best that I can be. And some come in with those skill sets immediately, and others can grow those skill sets. So each of you have given such an amazing repertoire, really, of things to choose from. So I really want to thank all of you. You've all contributed in such a wonderful way to this topic. And I know that we've got people that have put questions in the Q&A box. So I think, Emily, you're going to help me with that, but in directing those questions. But please, if you've got questions of somebody specifically, or even in general, you've got some experts here gathered, more than willing to help in any way that they can. So Emily, I'm going to ask you to reach out then.
Sure. I think this is a really good question from Melissa, and I don't think we've touched on it yet, but how do you understand the criteria for quality coaching and evaluate? Bashay, you touched on this a little bit, in evaluating the quality of coaching. So how do you, and I know Bonnie responded to that, but we'd love to hear a little bit more from all of you about how to make sure that you're getting the high quality coaching that's needed.
I'd like to touch just a little bit more on that, because we're actually working on a project right now with the Regional 7 Comprehensive Center, where we are putting together what we call a practice profile. And so we've taken those elements of coaching that we have outlined in our Alabama coaching framework, and we are looking to see this is what good coaching looks like. This is what better coaching looks like. And this is a non-example, so that we have a clear understanding for what it is that we're looking for. We've got a lot of people out there that are doing really great things, but can we take them to the next level? They want to be at the next level. They want to rise to the occasion, but may not know how. And so really taking a deep look. We're taking that practice profile right now with a group of 3 different districts. We're working the practice profile with them, making modifications. It's kind of our pilot that we've got going on, and then we'll be working to use our coaches to support that ongoing with our schools.
So similarly in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, I could say we have a 2-prong approach. The first is our rigorous talent pool process. And when we look at who is getting into and who's able to apply to the coaching positions, we have to see that evidence of impact coaching, and we have to see that they've got some sort of history there. And if not, we're helping people to develop that so that they are prepared to take on those positions. And the second is having a district staff is extremely important, because we spend a large majority of our time in the building watching those coaches to make sure that those coaching conversations really are effective. And if they are not, or if there's areas of improvement, guiding those coaches to reach the level they need to be at.
There's another couple of good questions here from Robert, really looking at how are you making sure that essentially the kids who are most impacted by the pandemic, the kids who need it most. So specifically, he's asking Peggy, what percentage of NBCT teachers work in high poverty schools and minority populations, over 90%, and really the same question for Brian in opportunity culture, and really all of you. So if you could touch on that a little bit.
For the national board, it's around 40%. The work that we focus on is primarily in those high need schools. In the Delta, the work that we're doing in Alabama, the work in Maryland, in California, the work that is in North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas, all focuses in that area. And then we do something for support of the professional learning facilitators. Everyone takes the same training. We have 75 networks around the country who do this work to support teachers through that. And I just want to throw out a challenge to everybody who is on this panel. All of you are amazing, and everything that you've talked about is leading to board certification. So I suggest, Sarah, that we have some research that we all put together to say, let's use your coaching models, leading them to board certification, and then the impact. We know the impact of board certification, and coupled with the impact of your support would be an incredible research project.
Good idea, Peggy.
I love that idea as well. And just to jump in here and answer a couple questions, we analyzed our most effective coaches. So the coaches that actually had an impact on teacher practice and student learning. And what we found is that the most effective coaches, they get in there with the teacher and they engage in a do whatever it takes approach. So for example, our best coaches, if a teacher is a novice and they need the coach to model something in the classroom, they do it. If they need co-teaching support, they do it. If the teacher is, coming back to my previous example, mispronouncing a phoneme in the classroom, they correct it in the moment. So our model is really focused on this in the moment feedback for teachers, which we found to be the most effective approach. And again, this means that everything else that everybody's talking about related to upskilling the coaches and building up their capacity to do this work is so essential, because it is hard to, one, have all the content knowledge required in order to do that, and two, have the EQ and sort of empathy for an adult that you need to get them to actually listen to you when you do that. But that's what we train people to do, like those two specific things: get in there and also build such a strong relationship with a teacher that they will be open to that type of feedback and support.
Can you dig into that a little bit more? Andrew had that question about how does this actually, what does it look like during the school day? And maybe, Michelle, you can jump in here too. Like how do you manage this time-wise during the school day so it's not taking extra time?
Yeah, so this is why I love direct to teacher coaching. So it's actually way easier to implement than PD. So PD, you have to find extra time. And if you are in a highly unionized school system like New York, you also often have to pay teachers to do anything in that extra time. The beautiful thing about coaching is that all teachers do all day is teach. And all you need to do in order to coach is have a little bit of time before they teach, where you prepare for the observation and feedback cycle, and a little bit of time after they teach to debrief the observation and feedback cycle. But the majority of the work happens in the classroom. That's why, like, our coaches, they're not just sitting there in the back of the class, they are doing the work with the teacher, because that's where you actually learn to improve your practice. And so we've actually found that school systems, and we work in highly constrained school systems. I would say New York City is the most highly constrained in terms of time for any type of teacher learning. And it's way easier for us to get time for coaching than it is for anything else.
There's a couple of parts of time that are so important. Sarah mentioned one, which is coaches getting MCLs or coaches getting into classrooms. We try to help schools carve out an hour and a half per week per teacher to do that, at least. But the other kind of time is that common time outside of the classroom to prepare, to plan, to look at student data together, to do professional learning that's more formal, to look at the content together and really get ready for teaching, and then to have the individual conversations. So we also help schools carve out many hours per week of common team planning time that can contribute to getting this job done, but all within the school day for sure. Teachers already work 50+ hour school weeks. That's gone up over the years. We don't need more of that. We need more in the week, in the day, get it done, and then go home.
Absolutely. Just to quickly add on to what Brian was saying, it's important that we prepare schools and school leaders to make these schedule changes within the school day, because it is a completely different way of looking at the coaching structure. So that really has to be part of the consideration.
And there's already, oh, go ahead. Did I just?
I was just gonna say, that's why I think that a couple of you need to put your heads together and craft a, kind of a how-to book. Because I don't know that creative scheduling is necessarily something that principals learn either in school and probably on the job. And if they've not been trained on how to use a master schedule well, then they're probably just using it the same way they've always done it. So the master schedule, to me, is one of the miracles of inside a school day. What can happen, what you can make happen if you come in a very creative way to think we need to make more time for teachers.
So there was already some robust sort of back and forth in the chat. I'm not sure if we could address it again anyway, like coaching for the coaches. So how do you make sure that that's also part of the program?
So in Alabama, we have been bringing in Diane Sweeney, who is a national coach. She has several books that she's written on student-centered coaching. We bring her in with our regional staff. We have about 100 regional staff, and she comes 4 times a year. One of those days that she comes for 2 days, one of those days that she comes, she coaches us on coaching. It is not content. It is not literacy based. It is about the coaching aspect. We look at various coaching moves, ways to get in there, ways to support, ways to question the local reading specialist, how to best support them. The other day that she comes in, she's going to what we call our Science of Reading Spotlight schools. We have named 10 schools and 2 districts in our small little state that have shown the greatest progress toward the science of reading since we implemented the Literacy Act in 2019. They are not your high-flying districts. There's somebody for everyone, but they've shown great growth. And growth was the #1 indicator, and then utilizing those elements of the science of reading. And so she comes into those schools, she pulls their local reading specialist along with our regional specialist who supports them. A teacher will come in and they debrief, and they do that on-the-spot coaching with that teacher so that our coaches are seeing that. It's a live experience to see coaching in action. And so it has proven to work very effectively for us. Following our time doing the regional coaching and all that we've gotten out of the book studies of Diane Sweeney, it resulted in her coming to our state and doing some large sessions for local reading specialists and for local math specialists. And the results were incredible to see how the teachers, the coaches responded to the learning that they got from Diane Sweeney, and how she works mastering that craft. When Bechet was talking earlier, he was talking about having those individuals who you got to hire well. You got to make sure you're choosing the right people to come to the table. And I've got 2 of the best people ever here at the state that hire our regional specialists, and they are remarkable. But as we're looking at that hiring component, we look at our results-based coaching tool. It is the tool that Diane Sweeney has trained us on, that we look at, and it always comes back to data. And it always comes back to standards. So what is happening with the standards and the data, and what growth do we see? And that is helping us to determine the effectiveness of that coaching opportunity. Did the data move in the direction we want it to move? Ultimately, that's what we're looking for. We're looking for growing students. So what does our outcome data show on that? So it's kind of a progress monitoring tool, so to speak, to look at coaching.
What I appreciate about what Bonnie has shared and what Dr. Wright shared about the master schedule and the examples that are being offered here is coherence and systems, right? And that coaching isn't an add-on to, this sort of episodic moment of, oh, we're trying to accelerate and recover, or we have an opportunity school that we're trying to intervene, and coaching is, those kinds of approaches are fine, and coaching can be impactful in that way. But really, when you think about the power of coaching, it's really in creating that culture of continuous improvement and systematizing in a coherent way the support a teacher is going to have from the moment they set foot in the classroom over the course of their career, and how that orientation to craft, as Bonnie said, unfolds. And what does that really coherent system of support look like? Just like we talk about systems of support for students, what does it look like to create a coherent system of support for educators? And that is definitely how we think about our work at New Teacher Center, beginning with induction and how you orient and support a teacher in those early years, and then how you pull that thread to help them continue to hone performance and impact over time is essential. And so often when you go into large systems as an as a nonprofit organization, you can find 5, 6, 7, 8 different coaching approaches that teachers are experiencing. And so if you are on this call and you are a systems leader or a program leader, you are someone who is in a position to actually have agency around how that coherence takes place, I would really advocate and push strongly, particularly in this moment when teachers are under such strain, to think about what does that coherence look like, and what is the learner experience, learner as in the teachers who are experiencing this coaching, but also what is the experience for the coaches, and how are you really building a system that's going to sustain over time as a core element of what your professional learning culture is within the district or school that you're working in.
I love that, Atini, because structure generates behavior. And so we've got to build that structure for what we want it to look like, and make sure that that's communicated to all persons that are going to be involved, so that they have an understanding of where we're going.
Yeah, I really can't say enough about that. And Tierney, that is so true about coherence, because people can gravitate to something that if they can see that it is going to benefit them, and that there is a coherence to what you're trying to get accomplished across a district or inside a school, and that it's not an add-on. It's not, oh, now I'm adding a coach tier. That they're not viewing it as the add-on, but they're viewing it as, Bonnie, I think you kept saying, the side by side. I think that's the part that is so important, that it's not, and Tina, you're so right, like it's not 18 different models that we got going on in a district or across the state. It's one coherent way of whatever that way is. The teachers see it as coherent, they see it as supportive, and they see it as also student-centered. Because I think you're right, we can provide all the help that we want, but if student outcomes aren't improving, then we need to re-examine the help that we're providing to make sure that teachers are feeling that they're growing through this whole process as well.
And nothing changes until adult behavior changes.
So true. So true. So
I'm
true.
gonna put in a plug here for another C word along with coherence, which is compensation. If you think about how do we make these coaching and these roles something that sustains over time, and that is part of a system that's coherent and consistent into the future. Compensation is really important. No teacher got into teaching because of compensation. But when you're in there, the idea that if you take on a role where you're supporting other teachers lets you earn more, or if you are part of a team that is reaching more students, you can earn more than you were before. If that structure is in place, it's just the right thing to do. They're doing more, they should be compensated for it. But number two, it creates a path that teachers can see before they even come into the profession. And then once they're in, they can see, if I come here and I'm effective, now I'm highly effective, I can lead others, I can support others, and I can earn more and advance in my career while continuing to teach. That can be a very big game changer for potential teachers, young teachers who are trying to decide whether to stay, and then of course the teachers that have the experience and are playing those roles. So even though money can't buy great coaching, money could be a critical part of a system that you create where coaching is valued, leadership of teams is valued.
So there is one more question here, and you're all touching on it a little bit, but I really like the way Michelle phrased this, and I know people have already responded directly, but the teacher, this is like a specific thing, but teacher-child relationships are crucial to child outcomes and success. Do any of your program models coach teachers how to cultivate trusting relationships with students of colors and their family, and the importance of those children being able to see themselves in their classroom school environments?
I'm going to jump right in really quick because the National Board, teachers are committed to their students and their learning. That is our first core proposition, that you cannot teach who you do not know. And you can spend the majority of, I think about Lovely Billups and her research saying 3 equals 33. I spend the first 3 weeks of the year really getting to know and build relationships with my students. And then I can start teaching them so that they know this joy of learning that you want to impart with them. And just thinking about the families, we talk about all of our 5 core propositions. Families are a big part of that. Communities are a big part of that, because children live in communities. They have families, and they have to be included in their educational process. And you get to know the families and the communities they live in as well.
This poll that we're not closing yet, but you see this poll that just popped up. For those of you that are on the webinar, please take some time to fill this out. We value your feedback, and that it helps us inform future webinars that we're doing. So I don't want to stop the conversation, but I did want people to know that it hasn't ended. We just put that up there for folks to start filling it out.
Yes, we take this very, very seriously. Thank you for taking a minute to finish it. Was anybody else going to respond to that last question?
I think along with what Peggy was sharing, the way we talk about that work at New Teacher Center is sort of around 3 core anchors. One is embracing teaching and learning as a dynamic relational exchange. So if you don't know your students, and you don't know their context, and you don't know the community, and you don't know their caregivers, it's really quite challenging in my experience to get students to invest, and particularly students who have been marginalized in our public schools and don't feel that they are places of safety and trust and reflections of who they are and the values that their communities hold. So that's really central. And I love the way Peggy framed it as, this is a core belief. And that is very similar at New Teacher Center. These are core beliefs about what is the true essence of teaching and what is the true purpose for public education. And if it is to support our democracy and to ensure that all young people have the ability to know the power of their own minds, which is how we talk about it at New Teacher Center, then there is no way to do that without deeply understanding about who you are as an educator and how who you are influences the lens that you bring to who your students and the communities that they reside in are, as well as the marriage of those 2 things with content. We can't love our students to death. We have to know them, love them, and use that knowledge in service of designing highly impactful, equitable learning experiences.
A large portion of the Alabama Literacy Act is parents and community, and really looking at how do we make sure that we're communicating to our parents what is going on with their child in regard to literacy. Are they having effective outcomes, or do we have deficiencies in certain areas? And so bringing parents to the table for student reading improvement plans whenever a student is demonstrating a consistent deficiency is a part of what is required. Inviting them to summer reading camp if they have a consistent deficiency is part of what is required for us. We're working right now on building summer reading camps that involve all kinds of aspects of the community, of various subject matter, but of course, we want to involve our key literacy components in that, but really knowing your students to be able to do that. And then this past year, a large goal of ours was to really work on family and community modules so that we could train our parents and community service providers on ways that they can support children. I will say I stole this from Carrie Wright and Kimyana Burke in the work that they were doing with regard to the family and community modules, and knew that this was an element that we were going to need to make sure that we embedded it as well. And part of what we do with that, the goal is not that we're turning around that training for families and communities, but we're turning that around to the school so that the school can be empowered to do that and to make sure that they're inviting the families into the school, into that safe environment. That's not to say we don't do trainings for families, but we want to make sure that it is really about those people who are closest to the children, taking that interest and encouraging them on how to support. So in that way, I would say, yes, that's the coaching aspect of it, is that we're trying to pull them into these various elements that are so important to be a part of a child's life. And regardless of where you are, regardless of what you look like or what you're bringing to the table, everybody needs to be invited to the table. And so we need to make sure that we're helping and encouraging our local reading specialists, our principals, our central office, of including families in that piece of the puzzle. We're not all the way 100% there, but we're getting closer, and we've got the right idea of what we need to do to get people there.
Emily, can I say one thing? I'll be really brief.
Well, I was going to say, because I was so glad that Bonnie brought that, the families and parents in. So I'd love to have everybody hear from everybody on how parents and families are part of your coaching. So yeah, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah. So, you know, at Teaching Lab, we're obsessed with getting research into practice. And so I'm always going to bring us back to the evidence base. And I just want to underscore that this focus on building strong relationships with students is not a nice to have, and it's not touchy-feely. There's also a strong evidence base behind it. And so I put an article in the chat there, but just to read one line from it, it says, more positive climates where teachers and students enjoy being with one another, treat one another with respect, and interact warmly, appear to yield more student learning. So I just think it's really important that we understand that, again, like if we actually care about improving student learning, we're going to employ every single evidence-based strategy, and this is one of them. And bringing it to parents and families, oftentimes the way you build really strong relationships with students is also by building really strong relationships with the parents and families. I have a 7-year-old son, and I'm so lucky that his teacher is amazing, but he's the type of teacher who texts me pictures, he texts me updates, he's got recommendations for my son when I pick him up at school. Like that makes a big difference in my student's life and in my life as well. And so I think like none of this is outside of the scope of what a coach can do to support a teacher. And again, like a coach shouldn't do everything. We should define this role well, but a coach should do everything to support a teacher to get all of the evidence we know leads to improving student learning into practice.
I would add one thing here, which is that we also have great evidence now that for students of color, having some teachers who share their background leads to better learning and other outcomes. And so it's useful to think about how can these models forward that set of goals that we have as a nation. And if you think about multi-classroom leaders, in our case, about half of them are teachers of color. They're each reaching 5 or 6 times the number of students that a regular classroom teacher would reach. So if you think about a pathway to reaching lots of students with teachers who share their background, thinking about these models to leverage and extend the reach of the teachers that we have can be really, really valuable moving that agenda forward.
And that needs to be a conscious strategy. I mean, that, yeah. Not something left to happenstance. That's a good point. Good point.
So there is one really simple question for you, Peggy, from Elif, and I want to make sure it's answered. So if there's a non-US citizen who's based in the US, can that educator be certified?
Yes, absolutely.
There you go. Simple answer. So Carrie, any other last thoughts? Any
No,
last?
I just am really so grateful to be here in the presence of these wonderful professionals, because each one has just brought such a different aspect of this very important topic about making sure that our teachers are feeling that we're investing in them just as much as we're investing in, building schools or whatever the case might be. But there's nothing, and I've said this again, there's nothing more important decision that you can make than who stands in front of that classroom. But then that person who's standing in front of that classroom needs all the support and all the help that they can get to really, really reach their own potential while they're trying to get children to reach their potential. So I just want to thank all of the people that have been here today and encourage those of you that attended, reach out to these folks. They're amazing at what they do. They've got tremendous background. I know there's not a one of them that would not be willing to say, sure, give me a call and I'll see what I can do to help you. So just thank you. Thanks for everybody for being here.
Yeah. And, it's funny, Carrie, you were saying they need to put their heads together and create a
Yeah.
tool. I feel like you need to put together a PSA, because it makes it so appealing to be a teacher, right? And we know that there's not as much interest, sadly, anymore. And so, but this just makes it, if there was a PSA that talked about these coaching cohorts and the way that you can learn from master teachers and learn from each other, I just feel like there'd be a lot more interest. But I can't say thank you enough to all of you, Carrie, for your brilliant moderation, esteemed Dr. Wright, and to all of you, our great leaders, both from the national programs and, Shay and Bonnie, from your states and districts. This was an incredible discussion. And I do want to say, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a part of a series. So we have up here the next upcoming webinars that we hope you'll register for, but also we do have, I just want to let you know, in March, we're going to focus on similar session focused on OST and out of school time and summer learning and ESSER investments in that. That's March 14th. In early April, Sarah brought up tutoring. We're going to actually focus on high impact, high dosage tutoring, 2 sessions focused on that. So, and we're also going to have a session on community and family engagement and mental health. So please stay tuned for all of that, but please do plan to join us next week for our double header. And the week after we have the Crucible of Practice, and that's when the OST and summer Smart Investment session will be. And also don't forget about our What's Working Exchange. If you are a GLR local community, please make sure to complete the quick survey there. It's a great way for us to capture and understand what's happening out in the field. So thank you again to everybody. Thank you for your time today, and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Much appreciated to everybody.
Thanks to everybody.
Thanks, everyone.